The absolute worst mistake of my career was not misdiagnosing a dangerous cardiac rhythm, but getting caught with my face buried in a locker, inhaling the scent of the senior trauma nurse's personal skin balm like a starved animal. Welcome back to the channel, guys. Before we get into how my professional life completely derailed into absolute chaos, drop a comment down below and tell me what city or country you are listening from today. I always read through them, and I love seeing where you all are tuning in from. Now, back to the nightmare. My hand hovered over the open duffel bag inside the metal locker. I was only looking for ibuprofen. My shift as a paramedic had been a brutal 14-hour marathon of sirens, heavy lifting, and the stale smell of vehicle exhaust. My temples throbbed with a relentless pressure. Silas, the ER trauma nurse who shared my shift schedule and, unfortunately, occupied 90% of my daily thoughts, had told me earlier that he kept a massive bottle of painkillers in his bag. He had left his locker completely open. It was an invitation for medical relief. But instead of finding the pills, my fingers brushed against a small, heavy glass jar nestled in the side pocket. It had no label. The glass was cool against my skin. Without thinking, without engaging a single rational circuit in my exhausted brain, I unscrewed the black lid. The scent hit me instantly. It was the exact smell that always lingered on Silas when we stood too close during patient handoffs. Cedarwood, crushed black pepper, and something earthy and dark that I could never quite identify. It smelled like quiet confidence. It smelled entirely too intimate. I brought the jar closer to my face, closing my eyes for a fraction of a second, letting the scent fill my lungs. "What are we diagnosing today, Carter?" The voice came from directly behind my left shoulder. I did not drop the jar, but every muscle in my back locked into rigid stone. I slowly turned my head. Silas was standing in the doorway of the staff break room. He was still wearing his dark teal scrubs, the V-neck slightly askew, exposing the sharp line of his collarbone. He held the steaming paper cup of coffee in one hand. His eyes, dark and impossibly sharp, were fixed completely on me. For an agonizing second, the universe paused. I held the open jar of his personal skin cream directly under my nose. I was looking for the expiration date. The words tumbled out of my mouth before I could stop them. It was a pathetic, transparent lie. Skin balm does not have an expiration date printed on the inside of the cream. Silas took a slow, deliberate step into the room. He did not look angry. He looked amused, which was infinitely more dangerous. "You were checking the expiration date by inhaling it?" he asked. His voice was low, carrying a rough edge from the long night shift. "Yes." I pushed the lid back onto the jar, my hands feeling too large and clumsy. Some organic compounds degrade quickly in hospital environments. I am highly sensitive to degraded compounds. Are you? Silas took another step. The distance between us evaporated. I am 6'2", easily outweighing him by a solid 50 pounds of lifting muscle. But when Silas looked at me with that quiet intensity, I felt like I was backed against a cliff. He reached out and tapped the glass jar still gripped tightly in my fist. "I just thought it smelled unusual." I stammered, stepping back until my shoulders hit the metal lockers. "Really unusual. Like antiseptic." "Antiseptic." Silas repeated the word slowly, letting it roll around in the quiet room. He did not smile, but the corner of his eyes crinkled. "Well, if you were looking for something to soothe the friction of those heavy uniform pants you complain about, I keep a dedicated sports glide in the lower compartment." The hum of the hospital ventilation system suddenly sounded like a jet engine. I stared at him, The heat rushed up my neck, flooding my face in a violently bright flush. What did you just say? I said, if you need friction glide, it is in the bottom compartment. Silas tilted his head. His expression remained completely neutral. You seem very interested in my personal care items, Gabe. I am just offering alternatives. I shoved the jar back into his bag and slammed the locker door shut. The metallic crash echoed off the linoleum walls. I am not interested in your personal care items. I was looking for ibuprofen. Why would I be looking for friction glide at 6 in the morning? Silas took a slow sip of his coffee. His eyes never left mine. Check your posture. I froze. My gaze darted down. In my panic, I had crossed my arms defensively over my chest, but I was also awkwardly leaning forward, trying to hide the immediate, humiliating physical reaction my body was having to his proximity. The heavy canvas of my paramedic trousers was unforgiving. The realization slammed into me like a defibrillator shock. I spun around, grabbing my high-visibility jacket off the nearby bench and holding it against my waist like an absolute idiot. This is not what it looks like. I forced the words through gritted teeth, staring at the tiled floor. I did not say it looked like anything, Silas murmured. He turned toward the door, the soft soles of his shoes making no sound. He paused just before leaving. Get some sleep, Gabe. You look entirely too tense. He walked out. I stood alone in the break room, gripping my jacket, listening to my own breathing. I felt utterly exposed. Silas knew. There was no way he did not know. He had deliberately provoked me, and I had fallen right into the trap. The rest of the morning was a masterclass in professional failure. My paramedic partner, Marcus, drove the ambulance back to the station, while I sat in the passenger seat, staring blankly out the window. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Silas leaning against the doorframe. During equipment restock, I dropped a full box of saline flushes onto the concrete floor. The plastic wrappers scattered everywhere. Marcus leaned against the open back doors of the rig, wiping grease off his hands with a rag. You are out of your mind today, Carter, he said, his voice echoing in the large garage. You just logged the wrong mileage, you dropped the saline, and you have been staring at the steering wheel for 10 straight minutes. Did you hit your head on the rig door? I am fine, I muttered, crouching down to gather the scattered supplies. Just tired. Long shift. Marcus snorted. We had 2 basic transports and a twisted ankle. It was the quietest shift we have had in months. He tossed the rag onto the bench and crossed his arms. You are acting weird. Are you sick? I am not acting weird. I shoved the saline into the overhead cabinet with too much force. The plastic bin rattled loudly. You missed the vein on the IV attempt for the ankle guy, Marcus pointed out. You never miss a vein. You could hit a vein in the dark while driving over a speed bump. I ignored him, focusing intensely on perfectly aligning the blood pressure cuffs in their respective pouches. My mind was spiraling. Silas kept friction glide in his locker. That was a normal thing. People had normal physical lives. Adults engaged in activities. Did that mean Silas was actively seeing someone? A doctor, another nurse, a guy, a girl. Why was my chest seizing up at the thought? I did not care. I only cared because we worked in the same hospital ecosystem and unit cohesion was important for patient outcomes. That was it. And obviously, I desperately needed him to not be interested in me. Because I was Gabe Carter. I was the guy who played rugby on the weekends, drank cheap beer, and dated girls who complained about my work hours. Is this about the ER nurse? Marcus asked suddenly. I slammed the cabinet door shut and spun around. What? Silas? Marcus narrowed his eyes, studying my reaction. The quiet guy in trauma. You have been jumpy every time we do a handoff with him. I am not jumpy. My voice was entirely too loud. Okay, man, whatever you say. Marcus held up his hands in mock surrender. Listen, forget about the hospital. I am keeping tonight completely clear. The precinct is hosting a mixer at the Rusty Anchor. Cops, medics, fire rescue. You are coming. I shook my head immediately. No, I need to sleep. I need to reset my sleep cycle. Chloe is going to be there, Marcus added, leaning closer, lowering his voice as if the ambulance walls were listening. The new dispatcher. Dark hair, always wears those tight leather jackets. She has been asking about you, Gabe. She specifically asked if the tall guy from Rig 42 was going to show up. I stared at the metal floor of the garage. The world Marcus was offering was incredibly safe. It was the world I understood perfectly. Loud music, cheap drinks, flirting with a beautiful dispatcher who thought my job was heroic. If I went to that bar, talked to Chloe, laughed at the terrible jokes the firefighters made, and stood in that crowded room, my life would snap back into its correct alignment. The strange, suffocating heat I felt around Silas would disappear. I would be normal again. Yeah. I forced a grin onto my face, the muscles feeling stiff and unnatural. Yeah, all right. I will be there. Marcus slapped my shoulder. That is what I am talking about. Wear the dark shirt, the one that makes you look like you actually lift weights. When I got back to my apartment, it was completely empty. The silence was deafening. I walked directly to the bathroom and turned the shower on as hot as it would go. I needed to scrub the hospital smell off me. I needed to wash away the lingering memory of cedarwood and black pepper. I grabbed my usual body wash, but the bottle was completely empty, producing only a pathetic wheezing sound when I squeezed it. I swore under my breath. Looking over at the small shelf, I saw a sleek, dark gray bottle of shower gel. I had bought it weeks ago, but never used it. I pumped a large amount into my hands and scrubbed my skin raw. When I finally stepped out and the bathroom mirror began to clear from the heavy steam, I stared at my reflection. Broad shoulders, heavy chest, tired eyes. This was exactly what Chloe wanted to see. This was the guy who belonged at the Rusty Anchor. I reached for my deodorant and froze. The scent rising from my skin was unmistakable. The new shower gel I had used. It was cedarwood. It was crushed black pepper. It was the exact same base note as Silas's skin balm. I had practically marinated myself in the very scent I was trying to escape. I gripped the edges of the sink, my knuckles turning white. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I could not breathe properly. I checked my watch. 5 in the evening. The bar mixer started at 8. I pulled on my dark jeans and the fitted black t-shirt Marcus had mentioned. I grabbed my keys. The bar was in the downtown district. The hospital was technically on the way. I sat in my truck for 10 minutes, staring at the steering wheel before I started the engine. I am just going to drop off the extra radio batteries at the dispatcher desk, I said out loud to the empty cab of my truck. That is a completely normal professional courtesy. The hospital corridors felt entirely different in civilian clothes. Without my heavy uniform and radio, I felt strangely vulnerable. The bright fluorescent lights hummed above me. I walked past the vending machines, past the waiting area filled with anxious families, and pushed through the double doors leading into the staff-only section of the emergency department. I told myself I was looking for the charge nurse. I told myself I was just dropping off equipment. I rounded the corner toward Trauma Bay 4. The heavy glass door was pushed half open. I heard voices, low, quiet voices. I stopped walking. I did not intend to hide, but my boots seemed bolted to the floor. I looked through the gap in the door. Silas was standing inside. He was not alone. Captain Miller, the head of the downtown fire rescue squad, was standing directly in front of him. Miller was massive, 6'4", shoulders like a brick wall, wearing his dark turnout pants and a tight gray uniform shirt. He was standing far too close to Silas, way too close. Miller had one hand resting on the edge of the examination bed, caging Silas in. Silas was looking up at him, holding a small medical flashlight, examining a laceration near Miller's collarbone. Silas's fingers, those long, careful fingers I had watched tap a glass jar just hours ago, were resting gently against the heavy muscle of Miller's chest. Miller was smiling. It was a low, intimate smile that made my stomach twist into a violent knot. There was an electricity in the room that had absolutely nothing to do with medical care. It was the quiet, heavy tension of two people who understood exactly what they were doing. Silas shifted his weight, his knee brushing against Miller's thigh. Miller did not step back. Instead, he leaned down, his voice dropping to a low rumble that I could not hear, but I saw the way Silas's eyes darkened. I saw the slight curve of Silas's mouth. A sickening, red-hot wave of pure adrenaline crashed through my system. It was not logic. It was not professionalism. It was pure, unadulterated possessiveness. Get away from him. The words tore out of my throat, loud and raw, echoing off the sterile tiles. I shoved the heavy glass door open so hard it slammed against the wall stopper with a massive crack. Both men jumped. Miller stepped back instantly, his hand dropping from the bed. Silas spun around, his eyes wide with genuine shock. I stood in the doorway, my chest heaving, my hands balled into tight fists at my sides. The air in the trauma bay completely vanished. I was glaring at Miller with enough intensity to start a fire. "Carter," Miller said, looking completely bewildered. "What is your problem?" I ignored him. My eyes were locked entirely on Silas. The realization of what I had just done, of what I was currently doing, began to seep into my brain, but the anger was still burning too bright to stop. That is the end of the story for today, guys. Thank you so much for listening to the end of this disaster. I still cannot believe I lost my mind like that in the middle of a hospital. What do you think you would have done in my situation? Have you ever let jealousy completely override your common sense? Let me know down in the comments, and please hit that subscribe button if you want to hear exactly what happened next, because trust me, the fallout in that trauma bay was worse than you can imagine. See you in the next video.